In this video I'm going to show you how to make this cute little box bag. It's the perfect size of bag if you're going out in an evening. You could make it in some rather snazzy satin or glittery fabrics, and it's a nice size handbag for a little girl or a child even. If you leave the handle off and make it out of a laminated fabric, it'll make a nice wash bag too. It is fully lined. It's got little D loops on either side to hook the handle on, so you don't have to have the strap if you don't want to. And again, it's all fully lined neatly on the inside, although there is a little bit of hand sewing in this, by the way. So get your sewing machine, your fabrics, your pen and your ruler and scissors ready, and this is what you need to get started. So you'll need to cut 2 pieces of fabric, one for the outer and one for the lining, and 1 piece of wadding or batting, and those are measuring 18 inches in length and 11 inches across. I've chosen a print which is non-directional because when this goes around, this is how your bag's going to be formed. If it was a directional print, then you're going to have one side of it upside down. If it is a particular directional print that you want to use, all you need to do is to cut it 1/2 inch longer, cut it in half, turn it around so that both pieces of the print are facing in the same direction, then sew it back together again. Then you'll just have a seam across the bottom of your bag. So I've adhered the wadding or the batting onto the back of my fabric with a repositionable spray adhesive. I like to use 505, and then we're ready to start cutting out the shapes. So I'll need to measure from the top and from the bottom 2.5 inches. We'll do this on both sides. And I'm just putting a little mark at that 2.5 inch way with, that's so you can see it, with an erasable ink pen. So 2.5 inches here and 2.5 inches here. Then using my ruler and keeping it square, I'm going to draw a line 2.5 inches in. And stop there. Okay, and the same on that side. My next line is going to be 4 inches away. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and draw another line 2.5 inches down. And then we'll join those two up, so I've got a box. And do the same on this side. So that's 4 inches by 2.5 inches. And I've got 2 boxes. So the gap in the middle here should measure 5 inches. So that's from there to there. I'm going to cut these out. If you're going to make a few of these, it may be an idea to actually make a template out of cardboard, and then all you need to do is draw around it so you don't have to do the measuring every single time. There, so instead of measuring all over again to do the opposite side, I'm simply going to fold this in half. I'll just hold it with a couple of pins so it doesn't slip. And use that as a template to cut the second pieces out. There. That one's not quite square. There we go. So you'll have two pieces that look like this. This one's got the wadding behind it, and the lining piece doesn't have the wadding behind it. And then what you'll also need are two pieces of fabric which measure 4 inches by 2.5 inches. Funny enough, it's the same size that you've just cut out of here, but I don't want the wadding on the back. Fold in half and crease. Fold either long side to the centre and crease again. And then you're simply going to fold that in half again, crease it and sew down both sides. And you'll need to do that with two pieces. So you'll have 2 of those. And you'll also need 2 little D-rings. These are prim ones. And they just hook through like so. These tabs are longer than you actually need them, but you're going to find it easier to sew them in with a D-ring in place and then trim them down if you need to, rather than trying to sew in a shorter piece of fabric. Right, so I'll need the zipper foot on my... Oh, I need a zip as well, which is here. My zip. I like zips that are longer. So this isn't a continuous zip, but it is longer than my 11 inches across the top here. And the first thing we're going to do is actually sew that zip in. What I like to do as well is to use a repositionable glue stick to hold that in place, because it's a lot quicker than pinning. But otherwise pin it and then hand sew before you actually commit to your sewing machine. So you can take the pins out when you're sewing, basically. So the zip's going to go right side down over there. I like to use a longer zip than I actually need, because I can sew a lovely straight line along here without the slider getting in the way. Right, so now the zipper foot goes on the sewing machine. Let's get sewing. Right, so I'm just going to go straight across the zip tape, right down the centre. You find with most zips actually that there's a different weave of the zip tape, which tends to be right along the middle, which is a good place to sew along if you're not too sure where to sew your zips. And there we go. And then the second side of the zip needs to go on the opposite side of your fabric, like so. So again, I'm going to put a little bit of glue across the top to hold it in place. These are invaluable. This is called a Prim Aqua Marker. I use loads of it. It's great if you're English paper piecing or for appliquing. It's like a stick of pins. Now when I'm putting the second side on, I need to make sure that this is lined up with the first side here. Stick it down. And the second side lines up there. If you are using any kind of adhesive with your sewing machine, do make sure that it's an adhesive that's been manufactured to work with sewing machines. Don't use paper glue. You don't want to damage your machine, do you? So we have this. I'm just going to turn it through the right side. Now I can chop off the ends of the zip, and you can do this with nylon zips very easily. If you're using a metal zip, do be careful. Don't use metal zips very often. Make sure you move the slider back out of the way and chop off the second side. And then just so that I can continue sewing with that zip undone, I'm going to put a few hand stitches just across the end to hold the ends together. It'll do. You won't see those, don't need to unpick them, so that's fine. What I'm also going to do while I'm here is to take those 2 loops of fabric that I made, thread them through the D-ring. Well, that's a clover D-ring, do apologise. Thought it was a prim. And these are going to go over the top of the zip. So again, this is where I find it easier just to leave a little bit of fabric to hang on to, because I only want about that much, about ½ an inch or a centimetre or so of that pull showing. But it's easier with that on, then I'll chop it off in a bit. So I'm just going to tack across the end, just to hold those in place while I sew. And I can trim that back. Same on this side. Offer them up so that they are the same distance, and again we'll sew across. So that's how we're looking. So I'll put the standard foot back on my sewing machine, and then we'll continue to sew. Right. So turn this inside out again, and we're starting to give the bag some shape. So we need to sew across both ends of the bag, so the zippered end onto the bottom of the bag, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6 millimetres. Be careful when you come to the zip, because there's a lot of bulk there, so just take it easy. You should be able to sew over the teeth of nylon zips very easily. They're not actually teeth, it's a coil. It's a nylon coil, but just take it slowly with your sewing machine. Take the other side. If you do find, by the way, that you've left the tab a little bit too short and you're trying to manoeuvre your sewing machine foot around the D-ring, then just put your zipper foot back on the sewing machine, and that'll take your stitches closer to the D-ring without taking the foot closer to the D-ring. So that's a little tip for you. Just making sure the zip's opened out as I go across and the D-ring's out of the way. Okay, now with those corners that I cut out, I'm going to open them out, squish them together, and sew straight across there. I'm not worried about which way the seams are going, to be honest, but if you wanted to open them out, then you could do. Also a few stitches backwards at the start and the end of your work, and that'll help to stop the stitches from coming undone. We're going to do that on all 4 corners. So this is why you're sewing with the zip open, so that I can now turn everything the right side out. And there is my little cube bag. So I'll press that and make the corners nice and sharp. But we don't want raw edges on the inside. I don't like to see that. So I'm going to make a lining in exactly the same way. So because I haven't got the zip in the top this time, I'm going to fold over the edge of my fabric by 1/4 inch and crease that. If I was nearer the iron, then I'd actually iron that now. But I've got a nice crisp cotton, which I have actually starched, so it'll crease very easily. If you're wondering where Bobbin is, by the way, it's a very hot day today here in the UK. I think it's the hottest of the year so far, and she's absolutely fast asleep in the shade. So we don't have an awful lot of excitement on hot days like this. The most you're going to get is a snore. Now, I have to imagine that this is being sewn together in the same way as the outside of the bag, which was like this. So pretend there's a zip, and there will be a gap down the centre, because if this was the outside of the bag, that's where the zip would sit. Pin it if you like. I'm going to sew straight across the edge here, keeping those two sides folded back. Same on this side. Oh, come on. Line those up. And then we'll pinch those four corners together in the same way. So open them out, squish, and sew. I've just got one more side to do, but I've just noticed that I've run out of thread on the bottom of my machine. So I'll just fill this up, finish it, and then I'll come back. So this is how we're looking. So with the lining, I'm leaving that inside out. Just take off these loose threads. Now this is where the hand sewing comes in. So that's the outside of my bag. I've actually pressed it so that I've made creases to make it really boxy shaped. And then the lining simply sits on the inside. And I'm going to hand sew the lining to the inside of the zip. So I just push all of those corners out. Again, I'm not going to pin it. And let's start to sew. You could turn the whole thing inside out if you find that easier. Right, so I need to sew the lining. I can see the stitch line where I sewed the outside of the bag on, and I'm going to sew that very slightly on the inside of that stitch line. So that's the stitch line, I don't know if you can quite see that, is here. And I'm going to sew this slightly on the inside. And the reason for that, if I take my stitches all the way through, I don't want to see them on the outside of the bag. I want them all concealed on the inside. Across the bottom of the zip here, again, I can see where those stitches were, where I held the zip in place. So just underneath there, or just across the top of where those stitches are, is where the bottom's going to go there. Once you get started, you'll find it really easy. So get your needle and thread. Haven't got a knot in there. So if you haven't seen this yet, this is a quilter's knot. So I take my thread pointing in one direction and my needle in another, so I've got a big loop of thread. I'm going to grab hold of the thread with my right hand, because I'm right-handed, and wrap it around the end of my needle a few times, 4 or 5 times, so that I've got a big spiral of thread around my needle like that. Then hold on to the thread with your other hand. I've got glue on my fingers, do apologise. And push the needle through and drag that twisted thread all the way down to the end, and you'll have a lovely little knot. Snip that off. Okay. So I'm going to take the knot onto the inside of the lining so you don't see it. And again, just underneath that stitch line, I'm going to do a slip stitch. So I go, where are you? There you go. Into the zip, take the needle across and out through the fabric, the fold of the fabric. Keep lining it up as you go, into the zip, underneath the fold of the fabric. You could use your repositionable glue stick to hold this in place before you sew, but you might find because you've got so much fabric kind of being manoeuvred through your fingers, it may not hold it. And one of the reasons that I'm not fond of pinning things like this is because it's all going to be all pins underneath here where I'm holding the fabric, and I'll spite myself. So that's looking nice and neat. Don't beat yourself up over this being absolutely perfect. If you're making a bag for yourself, this is the lining side, remember. So nobody's really going to see it. If you're making this to sell, then that's different. You've got to be pretty perfect. Okay, I shall leave you there. I'll carry on sewing all the way around because this is going to take me 10 minutes or so. And then we'll come back and I'll show you the finished bag. So we're almost finished with my little bag. I'll just show you the inside as well. So this is where I hand sewed the lining on. And you can see how nice and neat that's finished off on the inside. And I like to see that. It's always nice, particularly if you're giving something as a gift and you look on the inside, that it looks as good as it does on the outside. The one final thing that I'm going to do is to add a little strap. It's cute, isn't it? So for this, I've used a piece of cotton webbing, which is about 18 inches long. Make that as long or short as you want to. I have some like little lobster claw clasp twist rings, I think these are called, which are the same width as my strap. My strap's 1 inch wide. If you've ever been to an exhibition or anywhere like that where you're given a lanyard, when it comes to throwing the lanyard away at the end of the show, if they don't want them back again, take off the little hooks on the end. You'll find them really useful, and you haven't really paid for them. So let's hook this onto each side like so. And there's my little bag finished. Hope you like it.